you.
Thank you.
To take us on.
And here's my voice coming on. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Tom. I've been with the church for quite some time. I was going to say I speak regularly. I've done it once a year. I don't know if that's regularly or not. Often in the summer. So we've been having this series on Psalms, and this is the fourth one, and there are others to come. And when I was thinking about, when Rupert asked me to do a talk, what came to mind was that I think there are some connections between Psalms and film, and I think film can shine a light on the book of Psalms, and that's what I'd like to explore together with you today. So I've got a title slide up there. The title is Into the Multiverse, Psalms at the Movies. Psalms have always been, and I'll explain the reason for that in a sec, Psalms have always been my favorite part of the Bible, I think, because I find them so relatable, and they're emotionally powerful, and they're immersive, and they speak to me deeply. And I'm sure that's the case for others. By exploring them through the lens of a series of films, I'm hoping that I can share a bit more of why that is, why they have that emotional and powerful effect. So we're going to be breaking things down a little bit. The multiverse of the title slide is the name given to the hypothetical collection of universes, multiple universes that exist alongside each other within the fictional world of Marvel Cinematic Universe. I don't know if that rings a bell with anybody. And I guess it relates a little bit to, or reminds me a bit of just the depth and the complexity of the book of Psalms. And the multiple verses within that book. Psalms are a unique literary art form, and they share similarities with a whole variety of other art forms, with literature, with art, paintings and such, and with film. And a good film, of course, fuses together art and literature and other art forms in it, and a really good film will bring those together in a particularly impactful way. So could I have the next slide, please? So there's some themes that I'd like to explore with you that I'm showing here, and these are the themes or connections between film and Psalms, or some of them at least. So firstly, the entire book of Psalms has its own narrative arc or plot or storyline. And that's something I've been exploring a little bit recently, which I think is really interesting. So we're going to go into that. But the Psalms also utilize powerful metaphors as well, okay? As do films. So they utilize creative language and metaphors that ignite your imagination and help you immerse yourself. And metaphors are also kind of open to interpretation. So, you read your life into them when you encounter a metaphor. And it helps to engage the full range of emotions. So metaphors, another thing. Also, I've got up here repetition and juxtaposition. So these are techniques that we see, again, across all art forms. But they're a literary pattern that you see within the Psalms. So juxtaposition or contrast is a way of enhancing meaning and impact. Yeah, and repetition, again, invites us to slow down and to circle around a verse. So again, these are things that we're going to look at briefly. And of course, thinking about it more widely, Psalms actually draw out the deep longings of the soul. okay? And Rupert was talking in his first sermon in the series here about his emotional response to the war in Ukraine and how in a psalm he found that met his feelings at the time, that longing for justice. And he was talking a little bit about that. And it's true, isn't it, that we all long for the good to triumph over evil. We all have a deep longing to see the truth win out and for the character to develop and emerge better at the end of the story. And wiser as the drama unfolds. We all long for the bad character to be redeemed or at least brought to justice. And these are all things that we see in films that are drawn out through film. And actually all of that longing for those sorts of things is actually a dim reflection of our longing for heaven, for everything to be right. And finally, when I spend time reading the Psalms, I often find that a door opens within me, and I get a glimpse of something that's like transcendence, something perhaps that's been hidden, and I make a connection, and I'm changed. And I think that can happen down at the Odeon too, potentially, but much more fundamentally as we engage with the Word of God, and I want to look a little bit at that as well. So, moving on then to our first film, or rather our first psalm. Can anybody tell me what film this one is? Hands up, anybody recognize this? So this is a film poster. Hello, yes, Ian. The Shawshank Redemption. Hands up who've seen Shawshank Redemption. Good, okay, good. So I'm relating. The book of Psalms consists of 150 ancient Hebrew poems, songs, and prayers, and they span several centuries of Israel's history. And it's a uniquely designed and curated collection of poems. It's not a random collection. It's rather, it has its own structure. It has its own sort of narrative. And I've just been digging into that a little bit. So it's uniquely designed. And when you read it from start to finish, it tells the story of a nation suffering under horrible circumstances, waiting for redemption from exile. You know, that's the story that's told throughout the book. So there's a narrative arc to it. And I think as I'm beginning to get a feel for the whole, that casts a light on the individual parts, you know, it enriches the individual psalms to know that they're part of this set, they're part of this sweep, this narrative sweep. And so I'm looking at Psalm 124 and I'm linking it with Shawshank Redemption. I'll explain that in a moment, but Shawshank Redemption, for those who don't know it, tells the story of Andy Dufresne. He's a banker, wrongly convicted of murdering his wife. He's sentenced to life imprisonment at Shawshank Penitentiary. And the film's like an unflinching portrayal of an unforgiving world characterized by brutality and despair. And Andy undergoes terrible time. He's subjected to corruption and manipulation and torture. You know, it's a hard watch. And it highlights the difficulty of maintaining hope over a long period of time and a sense of identity when one is imprisoned. It does that really, really well, really powerfully. And there are moments during the film where Andy starts to experience glimpses of hope. So he uses his financial and organizational skills, if you remember, to do things like start a library in the prison. And there are these sort of moments that feel uplifting, especially in the context of the kind of general despair of the film. So there's this sense of purpose and hope that kind of, you get glimmers of that. And there's a tension because you've got hope and despair. You've got sort of moments of hope intercut with that, with scenes that really evoke the despair and the difficulty of prolonged confinement. So that tension between despair and hope, between sorrow and praise, is actually reflected in the whole structure of the Psalms. So in the first 3 books of the Psalms, they are predominantly psalms of lament, but then there are occasionally psalms of praise in there as well. So we see a little bit of that structure. And I think part of the power of the film is that it's the way it builds a sense of anticipation up to the point where Andy finally escapes, and it's really good at that. So there's a long period of years leading up to this, and there's this wonderful climax where his very ingenious escape from the prison is then revealed. There's a dramatic reveal, and after years of meticulous planning, he finally makes his escape. And it's very powerful. It's one of the most emotionally powerful, uplifting films I've seen. And Psalm 124 is I've mentioned there, is an example of a psalm which powerfully evokes that sense of confinement, an escape from confinement, whether it be physical or spiritual or emotional or psychological. And I quote, "Praise be to the Lord, we have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken and we have escaped." And I put Psalm 148 up here as well, because unlike the film, the book of Psalms it doesn't give us that emotional satisfaction of standing in the rain and being free, but rather it's a not quite yet happy ending, the book of Psalms, and I'm sure you'll appreciate that. The book closes with 5 poems, summoning all of creation to praise God, and referring to a Saviour King. And this, that you'll see here, it talks about the lifting up the horn of his people. So that, that's a symbol of strength, of future victory, and deliverance from evil, and specifically looking forward to redemption in Jesus. So this is about joyful anticipation of a happy ending. This is about being in exile and actually celebrating ahead of time freedom that will happen in future. And I think that's a key difference. So I'm just wanting you to notice. This is it. Biblical faith and prayer is about anticipation, isn't it? It's about looking forward to when God will fulfill his promise in freedom and joy. And actually, coming back to film again, I've heard it said that, a lot of the enjoyment from a film comes before you go to the cinema. Have you ever heard that one? And I think there's something in that, the anticipation of going and doing anything, whether it be watching a film or approaching any milestone, or brings with it a lot of joy. That's the place where we are as Christians. We're living in a place of a kind of not quite yet happy ending, and that in itself generates a lot of joy, a lot of hope. And so I'm just wanting us to notice that difference. It's profoundly human, and the Shawshank Redemption just vividly evokes, I think, that sort of tension that we live in, that's reflected in the Psalms, of joyfully anticipating our homecoming and the freedom, while sort of suffering under the limits of a fallen world. That's the tension that we all live in. So we see something of that in the Shawshank Redemption. But I'm going to move on to another film. It'll be interesting to see who's seen this one. And again, I've replaced the film title with the psalm. So who thinks they know what film this is and can tell me the title? Is it Gravity? Yes, it is. Didn't see there, Kirsty. Well done. Gravity's the name. Anyone seen Gravity at the cinema? Yeah, good. I'm still relating. This film is, I think, really visually very powerful, an award-winning film. And I wanted to touch on this because we're talking about metaphor next. Okay, this is all about metaphors in the Psalms and the power of metaphors as visual imagery. So the film focuses on the plight of a Dr. Ryan Stone, played by Sandra Bullock, and she's a medical engineer. She's on her first shuttle mission with commander and veteran astronaut Matt Kowalski. And he's helming his last flight before retirement. But during a routine spacewalk, the pair encounter a disaster. The shuttle's destroyed, and they're left spinning in space with no hope of escape, no contact with Earth. And they realize that actually to save themselves, they might actually need to venture further out into the darkness and depths of space. It's on your edge of your seat stuff. And I'm going to relate, I just want to use that as a lens to look at Psalm 69. Can you have the next slide? I think it's a picture of being at the end of your tether. This probably is a particularly good one. Despite being set in space, which is obviously a very modern idea of people being in space that didn't exist for the ancient poets, it actually draws a lot from ideas around shipwrecks and other kinds of disasters. And the film evokes the sort of psychological dynamic of being shipwrecked or being in a disaster. So it's not necessarily particular to space. It explores how somebody feels in the aftermath of a disaster or a catastrophe. And the film's main theme is adversity. And adversity is sort of symbolized by this shuttle, this wreck of the shuttle that's spinning around, and it's a very ominous presence in the film, and it's, it threatens, it's a threatening force throughout the film. As I say, next slide, please. There are outstanding special effects and lots of claustrophobic shots of astronauts within time capsules and spacesuits, which just creates this tension. And there's a very unpredictable plot to it that keeps twisting and turning, and it's highly atmospheric. It's visually striking, and it's emotionally powerful film. So in the next slide, we've got Psalm 69. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there is no foothold. I have come into deep waters, and the flood sweeps over me. Psalm of David, which carries this theme of adversity and employs powerful metaphors. So like Ryan spinning out of control in a claustrophobic spacesuit, David's confronting physical and emotional trauma, and this is what's coming through. But notice the metaphor here of deep waters to sort of convey that. It's expressing that feeling of being overwhelmed by suffering and persecution, and a sense of being drowned in despair. And chaotic waters are a foundational image, actually, in the Bible that's introduced right at the start. So you will remember Genesis starts with God hovering over a dark, stormy ocean, and then bringing order to that and separating that out and creating dry land. So this is a fundamental metaphor that the biblical authors then took, and they developed it throughout the Bible. So you see it again and again. So it's a really foundational image that it's good to note. And it represents often danger or dangerous people throughout the Bible and in the Psalms. And also enemy nations, but there's that sense of danger. There's this climactic moment at the end of Gravity, which I think personally is really powerful, where Ryan, having finally crash-landed back onto Earth, escapes out from her capsule, makes her way through the mire of a lake and crawls back onto dry land, onto a sandy beach. And it's a powerful expression of safety and security and stability on dry land. And it's particularly powerful because it contrasts with the rest of the film, where she's been spinning around in disorientation. I know that a lot of what we've been talking about in relation to Psalms is about orientation and disorientation. So finally, the film, having been characterized by a lot of black space, to suddenly cut to planet Earth and the water and the sand in her fingernails, it's just really powerful contrast. And it conveys, I think, really strongly this sense of dry land. Now, this is what God created. It's what humans need: stability, safety, being grounded. How does that feel? Obviously, this is a physical metaphor, but it points to a psychological and emotional and spiritual state. We all want to feel grounded. And so I think Psalm 69 is one example of metaphor, and I think it speaks to this deep human need that has existed right from the beginning. So it's this powerful shift from a state of disorientation to one of renewed hope. So there we have it, Gravity, on Netflix. Go and watch it. Or more importantly, Psalm 69, go and read it. Okay, next up. Ah, come on. Groundhog Day, they all shout. Okay, good. So a few people have watched this one. This is a fantasy romantic comedy from the 90s. And the protagonist, played by Bill Murray, is a cynical weatherman on TV. And he finds himself trapped in a repetitive cycle where every day he wakes up listening to the radio. It's I Got You, Babe by Sonny and Cher. And it's then followed by exactly the same radio banter. And so it goes on. So he's trapped in this cycle that lasts a day. Groundhog Day. And he realizes quite quickly that there are no consequences to his actions, because he wakes up and it's all the same and it starts all over again. So he gets up to all sorts of nonsense and acts out pretty badly. But then as time goes on, he starts to change. And this cycle of repetition starts to have an effect an improving effect on his character. So he starts thinking about other people and acting in more selfless ways, and ultimately, having reflected and having grown a little bit, he falls genuinely in love. And it's the point that he does that he finally wakes up again to I Got You, Babe. But then life carries on, and it's clearly the cycle has been broken, and he realizes that he's not alone anymore. So actually, I think the film brilliantly demonstrates this idea of repetition and how repetition can drive character growth and plot. You know, it's a classic example, if you like, of repetition in film. So next slide, please. I think we've got Phil in bed with his clock radio, listening to this, just to have this wonderful moment where he's breaking the spell, if you like. But, you know, Psalms employ repetition, and this is the key point. It's a literary construct with a specific purpose that is quite powerful, and I'd like us to note that, because I think this is helpful. So we've got a prime example that you'll be aware of is Psalm 136, which features the refrain, "For his steadfast love endures forever," and it's repeated 26 times, yeah? And this repetition emphasizes the enduring nature of God's love and mercy throughout history. So there's a point to that. But in the next slide, I've paired this film with Psalm 5, because as a psalm of orientation, it's an example of something that includes a positive pattern of repetition. So just to go into that a little bit, the poem begins with a line that sets a pattern repeated throughout the book of Psalms. It's one of many that begin with a desperate lament. So it says, "Give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my groaning." Give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my groaning. And it's the first of 29 instances throughout the book of Psalms in which the poet asks God to hear their prayer, okay? So it's the first instance of 29 where the poet asks God to hear their prayer. That's a key point I just want you to sort of latch on to. So this is a deliberate literary technique. It recognizes our inclination to look for patterns. I think importantly, like Phil Connors in Groundhog Day, it's a pattern of repetition that actually invites us to slow down and circle around this a little bit and to pay attention. I mean, Andrew, a couple of weeks ago, talked about the power of Psalms to slow us down. He talked about the turning aside and that impact, that effect of slowing us down and helping us to stop and to meditate. So these 29 instances of God hear my prayer clearly suggest this is an important way of praying. They give us a familiar pattern to follow. You know, there was a song that we were singing earlier where you were saying, no, you're talking about having no words. I have no words. We were singing that. That was the first song we sung this morning. And this pattern that I'm talking about is for when you've got no words, isn't it? It's a way of we can fall upon these words when we have no words. But I think there's more to it than that. I think there is variation as well. This isn't a formula where it's the same every time. It doesn't say, "Give ear to my words" 29 times, but there's a whole variety of ways that are offered for us to do that. So a couple of examples. In other Psalms, it says, "Listen to the words of my mouth." And elsewhere it says, "Incline your ear to my cry." And elsewhere, "Hear the voice of my petition." These are all different ways of expressing a similar thing, but they just point to the fact that, this isn't about trotting out a formula, but this is a real relationship. So going back to what Andy was saying very helpfully earlier, he was saying, it's all very good having lots of ideas, but fundamentally the foundation is a relationship. And so this pattern of repetition with variation points to the fact that we're in a relationship. We're approaching God as part of an authentic friendship. It's a rich and complex conversation. God expects us to come to him with our grief and our pain, but he also expects us to ask. I think that's another thing that has been pointed out to me that I've found helpful. There's something good about asking each time. Do you get what I mean? And it might be easy just to launch into talking to God, give ear to my words. There's a request, and there's gratitude in that, which I find really helpful to bear in mind, to not be entitled, to not have a sense of entitlement with that. It's sort of setting out, this is how you approach God in prayer. Yeah, he's your best friend, he's your lover, but he also wants you to ask. Let's not take it for granted what has been given. So, keep asking, and keep asking, and keep asking, repeatedly, but with authenticity from the heart. And perhaps like Phil, if you keep doing that, you'll be changed, and your cynicism will be melted away, and one day you'll wake up and you're not alone anymore. How about that? Right, moving on. Now, I tried this out with the liquid group the other day, because I wasn't sure how it would go down, and they said they reckon this was Jurassic Park. And I think you were messing with me, but I'm still not sure. So come on, guys. Hey? Finding Nemo. Thanks, John. So has anybody who's under 20 know the answer to this one? Hands up. Jaws. Jaws. I'm pairing it with Psalm 70. Jaws. Who's seen Jaws? Is it the biggest show of hands yet? There's still quite a few hands not going up, so I do recommend it. Huh? I should have given a spoiler alert right at the start. I've gone and spoiled so many films for you today by revealing the ends to all of them. Yeah, and I do apologise. It's all to a good ends, though. So there's a beach, the famous beach scene in Jaws. Are some of you with me? And Spielberg uses the technique of juxtaposition or contrast in this film. It's a famous example of that. And he uses it to build tension and suspense and fear. How does he do that? So he's got shots of children enjoying themselves on the beach, and they're splashing in the sea, and the waves are lapping gently against the sand. And our hero, Martin Brody, who's the chief of police in Amity Island, he's having a shoulder massage. You know, it's all pretty relaxed, actually, yeah? But then it cuts to suddenly you're under the water, and you are the shark. And you're circling around, and you're looking up, and it's dark, and it's murky, and there's obviously that very famous symphonic music in the background, which we all know. And you can see the legs dangling down. And it's kind of voyeuristic and creepy. But actually, what he's doing there is he's cutting back from one to the other. Sandy beach, all's fine. Under the water, creepy. Fine, creepy, fine, creepy. And quicker and quicker. And what's happening there from a film point of view is it's creating tension. It's creating this suspense. So it's a famous montage sequence. And I'm just mentioning that because just in the way that it maybe shines a light on something which is actually more subtle, a lot more subtle, but an important and key aspect of the way Psalms are written. So if we go on to the next slide, Psalm 69. Next slide, Luke. Thank you. Sorry, Psalm 70, verse 5. But I am poor and needy. Hurry to me, O God. You are my help and my deliverer. So this is an example of a couplet. and I've been delving. I really recommend the Bible Project, because I've been delving into that, and they have some really good sort of podcasts on the Psalms that I've found helpful, and also looking at biblical poetry. And so I've been listening to Tim Mackey talk a bit about biblical poetry, and he talks about couplets. And these are where two very carefully worded verses are arranged next to each other, and they're placed beside each other for particular reasons. So the first line makes a basic statement, and then the second line then develops it in some way, and it can develop it in the various ways. It can deepen it with further images. It can complete that statement, or it can contrast that statement. And we see that pattern throughout the Psalms. So it's really one to look out for, because I think this is helpful. So in this case, the psalmist begins the couplet by pleading to God in fear, as underlined in red here. There's something about the raw expression of his feelings. It's about, there's something audacious about speaking to God so directly in the here and now. There's a sense of urgency, even panic, in the line. But then, and I wonder if you can notice and see this, that in the second part of the couplet, there's a change of tone. And it's more of a statement. And it's a sort of a reassertion by David of that God is here now. God will deliver and help him. And in fact, he's using the situation to stimulate praise. And what's going on here in this couplet? What's going on in this contrast, this juxtaposition? I think there's something powerful in between the verses. I think there's something powerful that when you look at the two verses, there's something in this that's greater than the sum of the parts, if you know what I mean, in terms of the pivoting from one thing to another. So what is happening if we just sit with that for a moment? I mean, the first line challenges me to not pray vaguely, but to pray with passion and from the heart, and to be real about my emotion. But the second line speaks of the fact that when we've expressed ourselves, we can find the capacity, we're then able, arguably, to take a renewed perspective, one where God is faithful and he is present. So there's something going on there emotionally. There's a sort of direction of travel. There's a little journey just in between those lines, which I think is very instructive for us. And as I say, it's a pattern that can be found elsewhere, and it's something we can look out for and we can dwell on, and which is real to our human experiences. It's actually, again, this juxtaposition between the two lines reflects what some theologians apparently say is the big idea behind all of the Psalms, which is that we should neither ignore our feelings, on the one hand, nor let them determine our actions and our lives, and that tension. God will fulfill his promises, and he'll send a Messiah in the form of a Savior. And I think, just going back to Chief Brody for a moment as a character, there's a little bit of parallelism here in that here's a guy, everyday sort of hero type guy. We learn during the film that he has a deep fear of the sea from a near drowning experience from when he was a child. And so he is highly relatable because we understand his fears, and you can see them written across his face there in that picture. But that fear, that raw fear that we know he experiences, doesn't stop him from going on this journey where ultimately he goes out into the ocean and tracks down this monstrous shark, driven by the desire to make the people of Amity Bay safe and make that place safe again. So, he's somebody who experiences these feelings, but he doesn't let them determine the outcome of the film, the outcome of his story. So I think there's something there about not ignoring or hiding the fears or letting them determine the character's actions, which again speaks to this psalm. That's pretty much it. There are so many films out there and so many aspects to psalms you could go on all day, but there were some of the reflections I had. There's just a couple, just to conclude. Luke, could you give me the next slide? So we've just explored a few psalms through the lens of film, and we've considered them in terms of narrative arc, in terms of metaphors, in terms of patterns of repetition and juxtaposition. And we've talked about them a little bit in terms of longing and transcendence. And I was thinking the other day about film, particularly the example of the gravity one. That's an example of how films are so much more exciting these days. And the development of computer technology means that they're more jaw-dropping than they've ever been. And audiences lap that up. And I think what they're looking for is that truly immersive, out-of-this-world experience. But the bar just keeps going up in terms of what's going to deliver that. It used to be pyrotechnics, explosions. Now it's jaw-dropping, immersive 3D, 4D experiences. Does that really give you the transcendence that you're looking for? So while all that's going on, I've found in recent years, I feel kind of drawn to those arty films, where nothing much happens. Anyone else like those? And one at the back. And I'm thinking, why is that? And actually, there's something about that, those films where they're about ordinary people living ordinary lives and nothing really much happens. And why is that attractive to me? Why do I want to sit and watch that stuff? And it's probably because it reflects the sort of inner world that I would like to have. I don't want my inner life to be a case of like Die Hard 2, I want... I'm looking for peace, I'm looking to slow, to be at peace and to be quiet, and to be in that small, still place, if you like. So it's in the quiet, unrushed moments when I take a time to sort of slowly sip a psalm, like a really good glass of wine, that actually I might experience a moment of real transcendence. It's in that quiet place. It's not something CGI effects can never deliver, actually. When I sit with the Psalms, as I said before, sometimes a door opens and I glimpse something that has been hidden. It's a supernatural moment. There's something precious, and I'm sure you've experienced that too. And I guess in going through some of this stuff, what my hope is that if we can recognize if we're having broken down some of the techniques or the methods used by the psalmist and broken that down a bit, perhaps it oils the hinges on that door. And maybe it just lets that swing open a bit more easily. It's just a thought. That's, I think, what I'm offering you. Because I think it's about transcendence. I think where Psalms meet me, it's about transcendence, but not in the extraordinary, but in the ordinary and the everyday. This is where we can experience transcendence. This is where we can find a place for our longings. And sort of on that note, I'm just going to finish with a poem. by Mary Oliver, which is exactly about that. It's about transcendence in the everyday. And then once I've read it, may I suggest we maybe just spend 30 seconds in quiet, and then the guys could come up and we could have a final song. You up for that? So this is called Mindful by Mary Oliver. Every day, I see or I hear something that more or less kills me with delight, that leaves me like a needle in the haystack of light. It's what I was born for, to look, to listen, to lose myself inside this soft world, to instruct myself over and over in joy and acclamation. But nor am I talking about the exceptional, the fearful, the dreadful, the very extravagant, but the ordinary, the daily presentations. Oh, good scholar, I say to myself, how can you help but grow wise with such teachings as these? The untrimmable light of the world, the ocean's shine, the prayers that are made out of grass.